Today's stuff we're going to be learning is Bava Kamma Daf Design. Today's stuff is sponsored by our golden loving memory of Art's mother, Shirley, Sarah Bat Avram Bezicharecha, on her 8th year at site. She was a lifelong learner, a striver. She sewed and made mosaics. Once her 3 children were old enough, she went back to school, earned a master's degree, created a new career doing social work and counseling, and published 4 books on raising a family. She lives on in the talitot and quilts she made. She'd be proud to see the stream of B'nai Mitzvah that continues this year with the 2nd and 3rd of her great-grandchildren. We're going to get started with our daf. Just a reminder, I mentioned yesterday about the Megillah challenge, both for girls in high schools and for women of all ages all around the world. If you'd like to learn Masechet Megillah for Purim, we will help you with it. We will send you shiurim on a daily basis and help you to basically, and we have an extra month of Adar this year. It's a great opportunity to learn Masechet Megillah. So for more details, you can look at our website. At the top of the homepage, you can click right from the top and see how to get in to find the details, and the WhatsApp group, how to join. Okay, and please spread the word. I know if you're doing Daf Yomi, it's a lot to also take on another Masechet, so it's not, again, there are Daf Yomi learners who can do it, but it's also really geared to use an opportunity to get other people to get involved in the learning, so share it around. There's already been a huge, huge response, which just further shows how much there's a thirst for learning Gemara among women. So okay, very nice to see. We're going to now get started with the bottom of Daf Sadi Vav Amud Bet, about 7 lines from the bottom. Just as a brief summary, we started with, there's a study guide for today that will help with a bunch of charts. We started with the Mishna. The Mishna said that Rabbi Meir holds, basically, that slaves are treated like land. That means, karka eina nigzelet, this is the term that sounds confusing. What it means is, it doesn't mean you can't ever steal land. It means if you steal land, it's always considered the original owners. So any loss, any gain goes back to the original owner. You give back the land as is when you return it. And that is different from all the cases we've been talking about, where as long as, there's some sort of shinoi change, or perhaps not even if there's a shinoi, right? It's one of these issues. It's a little bit confusing. But when you steal an item, you have to then pay back the value of the item that it was at the time of the theft, because you basically end up acquiring it. And then we had a whole question on what basis you acquire, what kind of shinoi. But let's just say in broad terms, you acquire that item as the thief. Once it's acquired by you, that means you have to pay back from the time it was stolen, which means if you increased its value, no, you don't have to. If it decreased the value, you have to give the extra back to the original owner. You have to give it at its original value. So basically, Rabbi Meir said, slaves are basically treated like land. And therefore, it means you can get, now in this case, it was the Eved got weaker, you give back the Eved as is. Whereas the rabbis said, no, they're like metaltalin. You have to give back the value, you give back the Eved as is. Now he's older. Well, you have to compensate the owner and give it back at its value that it was at the time. Rav holds like Rabbi Meir, to which the Gemara says, how could you possibly hold like Rabbi Meir against the rabbis? The rabbis are the majority opinion, to which we said, basically he holds like a braita. And then we said, how could he hold like the braita, basically, or this first braita, which we didn't quote, but just basically is our Mishna with the reverse. Rabbi Meir was the one who said what the rabbis said by us, and the rabbis said what Rabbi Meir said there. Then the Gemara says, why would he choose a braita over a Mishna? So we said, really? We could say his Mishna, his version of the Mishnah, did not appear the way our printed version looked, okay? And not the one that was in front of the rabbis of the Gemara. Rav must have had a different version that was switched, and that's alternatively. You could say there's 2 braitot that show. And remember, a Mishnah is always stronger. This is the methodological point. If you have a contradiction between a Mishnah and braita, Mishnah is always considered better. But if you have 2 braitot that say one thing, and our Mishnah says the opposite, 2 is going to be more than 1. And that's where we ended. Now we're going to see the braita where this is the case. So it's going to take a little while to get there, but we're going to explain the case, and then we'll see there's 3 different permutations of things that could happen here. And the last one is going to be relevant for our purposes. We have what's called a kinyan chalipin. I give you my donkey, you give me your cow. At what point is there a kinyan? As soon as I pull your donkey, b'shicha, I pull your donkey, then I acquired it. You immediately acquire my cow, even though the cow's still in my domain. Now, what happens in this case is, yalda, when you go to take the cow, let's say the next day, you come to pick up your cow that you already purchased yesterday, because I already took your donkey. So the cow is already yours from Sunday, let's say. And now Monday, you come and take the cow. And it turns out there's a little baby cow right next to a baby calf, right next to the cow. The question is, when was that calf born? Was it born after we did the deal on Sunday and I pulled your donkey, which means that the offspring belongs to you? Or was it from before? Was it from Friday, let's say? We don't know. So you claim it happened after the deal happened and it's mine. And I claim, of course, it happened before and it's mine. So we have a debate about this. Likewise, if we have the same debate, and this is where it's going to come into play, if we have the same debate about we sold a maidservant. And again, we did the kinyan before, but I didn't pass over the maidservant until later. And now all of a sudden she has a child. So how do we know whose child it is? So there's three options of what the claims could be. And this reminds us of some sugyot we've seen before. Doesn't matter which one of us. Okay, you could claim or I could claim. I know it was under my watch. Okay, and the other one is just silent. Now, Tosfot says either this is bari v'shema bari adif. This is a claim. If one has a definitive claim and one has a doubtful claim, we hold by the definitive claim. Okay, now there's a machloket about it. Some people say that's not true. Okay, if you hold bari v'shema bari adif, if I come with a definitive claim and you just say, I don't know, like I say, I know it was born under my watch, and you say, I don't know, well, we hold by me, the one who has the definitive claim. Again, it doesn't matter if it's me or you, it's just whoever's definitive about it. But Tosfot points out, there's a very small Tosfot at the end of the stuff. Ulaman damar lo bari adif. Some people say, no, just because I'm definitive in my claim and you're misupak doesn't mean I'm right. And we don't necessarily rule by me. But still here you would, because the Re says, shtikako da adam. This isn't where the person said, Eini odeh, I don't know. You didn't say, I don't know, or I didn't say, I don't know. The second person said, was just silent. Now, silence is often viewed as admitting. So even if you don't hold bari v'shema bari adif, this is just admitting, okay? They were silent, so they must have been saying, I guess you're right, okay? Now, so therefore, in that case, sachaba. So if one person is definitive and the other one is just silent, then whoever was definitive in their claim that it was in my watch gets the child or the baby, the animal offspring. But if both of us say we don't really know because nobody really was paying attention and we have no idea, well, yachloku. That's classic. Mamonu mutal b'safek chokim. We have money. We don't know who's who. We split 50-50. We'll get to that in the very beginning of Bava Metzia with the talit. Anyway, what if we both make definitive claims that it was definitely born on my watch? So now what do? They say, well, in this case, now each one made a definitive claim. That's different from the safek claim. I'm not going to get into all these details here. We'll see this all when we get to Bava Metzia. But in this case, we basically say, me, who is selling it to you, I take an oath. I swear, Rabbi Meir says in both these cases, both the slave, and that's what's going to be important, and the animal, we're going to treat the slave and the animal the same. That's already key. That's what we wanted to show here. The Rabbi Meir holds slaves are treated like animals, not like karka, like it says in the Mishna. If that's the case, what do we say? People don't swear, we don't let people take oaths to collect money. Remember, the para was in my domain. The maidservant was in my domain. We hadn't given it to you yet. So in order to maintain the status quo, we allow me to take an oath and then we can leave the money where it was. That's a nishma v'lo mashalem. I swear, and then I don't have to pay anything. We don't generally allow you to go saying, oh, it's definitely mine and collect it. That only is allowed in rare circumstances, okay, where there's no option for me to be the one to take the oath. Okay, let's say I'm not an honest person. Okay, I've lied before. So then we don't allow me to take an oath and you can take an oath and collect. But there's only unique circumstances where we allow that. So therefore, in this case, since everyone's making a definitive claim, we allow me to take the oath to leave the money in my possession, leave the animal, the offspring or the child in my possession. That's Rabbi Meir. Now, this doesn't have to do with our topic, but of karka in and exelit. But basically what he's saying is, avadim are like karka. That's what we said. This is just a general thing. And avadim are like karka. And when it comes to land, there is no oath. You can't take oaths about land. So therefore, this wouldn't hold true for the slave, only for the cow case. Okay, that's just a proof that Rabbi Meir obviously holds that avadim are like movables. And that is the opposite of our Mishnah. We now have two braitot, and that was the second answer as to how we understood how Rav switched the Mishnah for the braita, because there were two braitot that held that way. Hi halacha ki Rabbi Meir. Now we just have a weird, something was strange. You might have thought about it at the time when I started learning this. I immediately had this question, which is, if Rav holds that Rabbi Meir in our Mishnah really is the rabbis, why does he say the halacha is like Rabbi Meir? He should have said, halacha ki Rabbanan mibaile. He should have said the halacha is like the rabbis and explain what the rabbi's position was, right? It's super confusing. He says the halacha is like Rabbi Meir, but actually it's not Rabbi Meir who says it. It's really the rabbis who say it. That sounds weird. So hachikam, what he really meant to say, like Rabbi Meir. You guys all think that the Mishnah is flipped and that Rabbi Meir is the one who says this, and you have the wrong version, which is our version of the Mishnah. He says, according to your version, I hold like Rabbi Meir. And that was, that's how we read it in the first place. But the Gemara had to kind of establish that. Now we have another question about this. According to Rav holds like Rabbi Meir, which again means really like the rabbis, which means that avadim, slaves, are like land. So now we're going to question that from something else that Rav says somewhere else. Do we really view slaves like land? Which means, again, when you return it as is, and you don't have to pay for what it was at the time of the theft. Now this was passed down by three people, but by two other people in the name of Rav. If I steal your slave and work the slave, I'm exempt from paying. Paying what? Paying for the value that I gain from the slave working, which also meant, and you have to say this, otherwise the rest of the sugi doesn't make sense, which also meant that I stole from you time that your slave would be working. Like imagine, right, the way we had this whole payment for shevet, all the days you don't go to work, if I steal your eved and your eved's in my possession for a week, that's 1 week of work that you're missing that you're not going to ever get back, right? So I don't have to give that back to you. Now, why not? If we say, right, if I say I'm supposed to return it kishada gzela because eved is like mitaltalin, then I return your slave as it was, and I just give you your slave back. That's it. I'm done. And that is really what it says here. But if we hold that avadim are like karka, it's like land, amai patur b'reshutei demarikai. What does it really mean? It means that I didn't acquire the slave, because land can't be acquired, slaves can't be acquired. That means it was your slave. And I used your slave for this week, and you didn't use your slave for that week. So I theoretically should have to compensate you for a week's worth of, because it was your Evan that was doing my work. I have to give you back that because it was all yours all along. It was never considered mine. So any shevach I got goes to you. And this is shevach. But again, we're going to have to see. It's shevach because I gained and you lost. Okay, because I was depleting you of income for those days. To which they answer, maybe I stole your eved when it was their vacation days. Okay, I didn't know if Adim got vacation days, but apparently there must have been some times where the slaves didn't work. Maybe also if it was agriculture, let's say. There were slaves who worked in agriculture and it was in between seasons and there was nothing to do. So it was talking about a time, okay, and now we're going to see this is a case of, back to the beginning of our Masechet, I benefited, but it was no loss to you because your eved anyway was sitting doing nothing. So, and in fact, in case you were wondering, the Gemara is going to say exactly that. Just like Rabbi Abba sent to Mary Barmar the following question and said, and said, please ask Rav Huna the following question. A squatter, someone who sits in somebody else's property without their knowledge, does he have to pay rent or should she not have to pay rent? So if you're living in someone else's property, they don't know about it, they weren't using it anyway, do you have to pay them rent? And what did Rav Huna answer? You don't have to pay. So that explains it. In other words, it could still be like karka, okay? Avadim are like karka, but you're exempt. Why? Not because avadim are like metaltalin, and therefore you don't have to pay any use you had. There's nothing to pay because you didn't cause a loss to the original person. Okay? To which they say, right, because you benefited, they weren't losing anything. To which the Gemara says, wait a minute. Don't you remember that sugya? It wasn't so simple. That zen and evazelo chaser. You don't have to pay anything. It's not so true. Hachi hashta bishlamahata. Now, if you remember, there were two opinions here. In the end, we said, if you're a squatter on my property, you don't have to pay me. Why? Because you're actually doing something that's good for me in one of two ways. Either bein lamanda amar beita mitva miyatva yativ nichale, or bein lamanda amar ushiat yukat sha'al nichale. Either which way we look at it, a squatter is doing something good for me. Either because, okay, right now it's terrible rains in Israel, the worst, by the way, since 1992 in February. I saw this yesterday. We've had the most rainwater in a short period of time in the last 14 days. And almost everyone I know has water coming in through one of their walls or something. So what's the issue here? If someone's living in the house, they can see the issues and deal with them. If no one's living in the house could get totally flooded and everything could get ruined. Right? And there's all sorts of things like that. It's better to have a house that's inhabited because people can fix things all along the way. It's just better for the house in general, all sorts of reasons. So it's actually good if a squatter comes to your property. Or there was a concern in those days, right? Like we always say, these haunted houses, these abandoned houses are haunted. So, the same way we say that, they believed that there were demons that would dwell in empty spaces. So what do we say? Either which way, the demons only dwell in these uninhabited places. If people are living there, it's better. No demons will come to the house. So either which way, it's good. But in the case of the slave, if I use your slave instead of giving your slave vacation days, you need vacation to rejuvenate, replenish, feel better, to be, go back to your work with energy. If I work your slave, your work comes back much more tired. It's bad for you. So why is it that I don't have to pay? Now, it just doesn't make any sense. Amre says, what do you mean? Switch your approach. What do you mean? Vacation is rejuvenating. If you leave your slave not working for a number of days, they get lazy, right? How hard is it always to get back to work after a week of vacation? Right? The day back after is hard to get back, right? It's a challenge. You're not used to working anymore. So if you do that, right, it's going to be worse for the Eved. The Eved is going to get into this mode of, oh, life is great. We're not working. I don't really want to work anymore. And they'll get lazy. So it actually is in their best interest. And that's why we compare it to this case. And that's why he didn't have to pay him, even though he views Eved like metaltalin. And theoretically, you should have to. I'm sorry. That's why. Sorry. I'm right. Rav. So now I got confused for a second. Right. Rav. That's why Avadim are like Karka. And yet he still doesn't have to give him the money, because even though theoretically he used the slave, because he didn't cause a loss and because it was actually in the best interest of the owner, then that's why he can hold that way. And, hold Eved is like land, but if you use their slave, you don't have to give back the amount of work that you used. And again, it would only be in a case where the slave wasn't working anyway for the master. If you worked a slave who was supposed to be working all those days for the master, you have to compensate them. Now we get to a very interesting case. And it's interesting more not because of the detail. Well, the details are also interesting, but more the dynamic here. We have Rav Yosef bar Chama, who's not the regular Rav Yosef, it's Rav Yosef bar Chama. He's the father of Rava. And he has a certain thing that he does, and his son is not so pleased with him. He says, Dad, halachic problem number one, halachic problem number two, what are you doing? And in the end, not for the first reason, because the first reason his father gives him answers, even that Rava gives him some trouble with, but he's going to answer it. The second problem, which actually doesn't really have to do with our topic, is going to convince Rav Yosef to stop what he's doing. It's just always nice when a son is able to convince his father not to do what they're doing, and that what the parent is doing is wrong. Okay, it's interesting. Obviously, it has to be done in a proper manner, of respectful manner, but very interesting. So. And this is the famous Rava that we always know about. This is Rava arguing with his father. Bei Rav Yosef bar Chama have a takif avde de inashe de masik buzuze va'avde behu malacha. He apparently loaned money to a lot of people, and when people wouldn't pay him back, he would seize their avadim, their slaves, and he would take their avadim until he paid them back. When they pay him back, okay, so let's say he had loans out for $1,000, they wouldn't pay the money at the right time. He would seize their slaves, have their slaves work for him. When they would return the money, the $1,000, he would return the slave to them. Okay? So he would work the slave, but he wouldn't compensate them for the time that he was basically using their slave, which is similar to what we just discussed. So Amarle, it should be Rava, not Rabba. Amarle Rava Bere, his Rava, his son says, my time Avid Marhachi, why are you doing this? Doesn't seem right. Amarle, he doesn't say why, but he says this doesn't seem right, probably because of what we just said, that theoretically you should have to compensate for the work that they did. Amarle, so Rav Yosef says to him, Rav Nachman, Avdinahom Krese Lo Shavi. He says, I'll quote you, Rav Nachman. What does Rav Nachman say? A slave is not worth the bread he eats, which means a slave makes, let's say, $100 a day, but you have to feed the slave $100 a day of food. So basically, all the work gets lost in the food, okay? It gets absorbed by the cost of the food. So I'm actually not making them have a loss at all because every day their slave would work, make $100, but they'd have to pay $100 worth of food, and that basically would be absorbed. They wouldn't make anything anyway. So I'm not causing them any loss because while they're in my house, I'm feeding them. They don't have to feed the slave. Amarle, so Rava says to him, what are you talking about? You might remember this dancing thing. This is the thing of the dancing where the guy had injuries on his head, and because of that, he couldn't go to work because they would try to find a case where there wasn't really damage, but there was loss of job. Anyway, Rav Nachman was talking about Daru, his slave, who was a dancer, like a kind of clown type character that would, or jester type of thing, which doesn't really make a lot of money. So for a worker like that and a slave like that, yeah, you're right. But but why would people have slaves if you had to feed them as much money as they make? Of course, regular slaves make more money than you have to give them food. So Amarle, now I see someone's writing that you don't actually have to feed your slaves. So while it might be true that you don't have to, people generally did. So therefore, what he's saying is I'm not really causing a loss. So Amarle, Ana ke Rav Daniel Svirale. So he says, fine, I'll give you a different answer. I hold like Rav Daniel. To Amar Rav Daniel bar Rav Katina Amar Rav. This is exactly what we just saw. HaTokef b'avdo shel chavero v'asavo melacha patur. And now maybe you would have to say, like we explained already, which is it's talking about when they weren't working anyway. I steal slaves that are not anyway, not steal, but seize. I seize slaves that aren't working anyway. And I'm actually doing them a favor because their slaves are working. And that's so he resolves this issue again. You'd have to say that a bunch of things would have to happen for this to work, or really one main thing, which is he would only be seizing slaves that weren't actually working at the time. Okay, but it's actually better for them not to be sitting idle. Amarle, so now Rava brings up problem number 2. That's only if you, what was the case that Rav Daniel, the son of Rav Katina, quoted in the name of Rav? Someone who steals a slave. It wasn't like there was a loan between them, but you, this is an interest problem. This looks like, it's not interest, but it looks like you're loaning on interest because in the end, and that's why I set it up in the beginning, I lend you $1,000. I then seize your slave and work with your slave, which I gain benefit from. And then I give you back the slave when you give me 1,000 shekels. So, or $1,000, whatever it was. For this loan, I got all my money back and I got use of a slave. That looks like interest because what's interest? You're getting more than what you gave. To Amar Rav Yosef bar Yumi, Amar Rav Nachman, and here he quotes him, someone else, okay, smart boy, right? He brings out another quote, and what does he say? A squatter doesn't have to pay money. That's only if but if I loan you money and then I squat on your land, I must pay you rent. Because it looks like rebate, because it looks like I'm gaining interest. I also lent you money. I'm also going to get all that money back. And in the meantime, I've also lived in your house and got benefit from it. So that looks like interest. So Amarle, Hadrabi, puts his hands up, says, you got me, and I'm going to stop doing this. Very fascinating story and interesting issues that come up, right? The things you have to think about. Itmar. Okay, if you want to know more about interest, we're going to get to all that in Parak Ezu Neshech in Bava Metzia. So coming up. Itmar. Hatokef sfinato shel chavero v'asaba melacha. So now instead of your slave, now we're talking about I took your boat and I used the boat for work, right? I move cargo ship. I move my stuff from place to place. Amarav, Ratzaf Charanotel, Ratzaf Chatanotel. This is a very strange thing. We're going to have to figure out what this means. If I want, I could pay you when I return the boat, okay, because I stole it. Do I have to return it also with the money of rental money? I used your boat for a week, so that would cost X amount in rental. If I want, I could pay you rental, or I could pay you pchat. And what is pchat? The depreciation. That really means, in other words, I pay you kishat hagzela, like we've been talking about. I basically acquire the boat. So if the boat was worth 100, let's say, I don't know, boat's worth, let's say $10,000. When I return it, I broke a few things, and it's now worth $8,000. So I have to compensate you the $2,000 because I acquired it while I used it, and now I have to return it the way it was at the time. So I can either do that, or I can return it as is and pay you rent. That's different. That's more like I'm using it and I'm paying you, for the use, like we talked about the slave, that theoretically, if we treated it like metaltalin, then you would have to pay that amount. I'm sorry, if we treat it like karka, right, I would have to pay that amount. So this is kind of saying either one, just a little bit weird. Shmuel amal, eino notel ela pchata. Shmuel says, no. This is clear. You acquire it when you steal it, and you basically return it the way it was at the time. So if there's depreciation, you have to compensate for the depreciation, but you don't pay rent for what you used it for. But Amar Rav Pappa lo plige. Rav Pappa says there's actually no machloket here. We're going to have two explanations to why they're not arguing. They're really each talking about different situations. Had avidi leigra, had lo avidi leigra. We're talking about a boat. I could have a boat that's my boat, and if you steal it, but I didn't rent it out generally. So if I don't rent it out generally, then of course you'd have to pay me a rental fee, and that's Shmuel. Shmuel was talking about when it wasn't normally rented out. And Rav was talking about when it's normally rented out. And then if it's normally rented out, then it goes like this. It's not that I could choose which one. It's that if I stole your boat and used it, and you normally rent it out, now it all depends on what was greater. Okay, it could be I broke a million things in your boat and your boat really went down a lot of money. And let's say $2,000, I have to pay the $2,000. Whereas the rental fee, let's say, is $1,000 for a week. So the depreciation, if I pay by the rental fee, it'll be $1,000. The depreciation will be $2,000. Could be it's the reverse. Often the depreciation is usually less than the rental fee because you pay a rent, right? You charge a rental fee expecting there'll be depreciation, and it's supposed to be compensate you even more than that. So it depends which is more, and you can make me pay that higher amount. Some people say, both are actually where it was meant to be rented, but you can possibly distinguish like this. Each one was talking about a different scenario. The question is, on what grounds did I get into your boat in the first place? Did I just steal it? If I just stole it, then we clearly view me as a thief, and this is a movable item, and therefore I pay b'shat hagzela, that's Shmuel. But if I went to rent it, now what would be the case? Let's imagine the scenario. I go to rent your boat and I don't put down money. I say, I'll pay you at the end. So when I bring back the boat, I don't pay you, or I just don't bring back the boat, right? I rent it for a week. I pay a rental fee for a week, and then I keep it for much longer. So if I went in with the intent originally to rent and then just didn't pay you the rent, and basically that's stealing, then the question is, right? Then Rav says, you can either charge me the rental fee, or you could charge me for the depreciation. Again, you're obviously going to charge whichever one's higher. Next issue. Gazal matbea v'nistak. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the Mishna. In our Mishna, we had two different types of cases. One is where something actually happened physically to the item, where the coin got ruined, okay, got a hole in it or something like that. The wine spoiled, all that kind of stuff. That we say, right, if you steal it and that happens, mishalem kishat hagzela, you have to return the item the way it was originally. But if it was matbea v'nifsal, truma v'nitmeit, chametz v'arla v'pesach, be'ema v'nitaber v'avera, something happened to it, but it was what we call hezek she'eino nikar, it's not noticeable, then you don't have to, right? You could just say, here, take this, even though right now it's worth nothing, okay? Because that's not a shinoi. That wasn't a change that was significant enough to make it acquired by you. Now we're going to figure out, what does it mean nifsdak? What does it mean nifsal? Okay, so remember, nifsdak means you acquired it because it was a shinoi. Nifsal means it wasn't acquired by you. You could return it as is. So we're going to have a machlok Rav Huna and Rav Yehuda how to define this. Rav Huna, nistak mamash. Nifsal, okay, nistak, obviously it's something physical happens to the coin, it's no longer usable. Nifsal psalto malchut. What does it mean, nifsal? It means that the coin is no longer used by this, right? Let's say the Romans were in rule, the Persians took over, and they say, the Roman coins don't work anymore. So that's what it means. It's nifsal. It's no longer in circulation. Rabbi Yehuda Amal, psalto malchut hainu nistak. He says, no, that's like the first category. That's a real shinoi. This is now worth nothing, and you can't use it. And that's the first. Now we're going to have to figure out, isn't it hezek sheinu nikar? We're going to ask questions on both of these approaches and then resolve them both. Ela hechidami nifsal. But then the question is, so what's nifsal then? Well, shepsalto medina zo v'yotza b'medina acheret. It's not a total loss. Okay, nifsal nisdak, according to him, is where it totally can't be used. Because the Persians are now in rule, you can't use the Romans, and the Persians took over everywhere, and there's no way to use the Roman coins anywhere. But if it's just that the Persians are ruling here, but the Romans are still ruling somewhere else, and you can go use your coin somewhere else, then you can actually return the coin to the person that you stole it from, because they can always find some use for it somewhere else. That's nifsal, and that's why you can say haresh chalafanecha. But if it's really not usable anymore, then you can't return it. So we're going to have questions because this doesn't really make sense in the whole. Both of these have issues. So we're going to see right now. So Amalei Rav Chisda le Rav Huna. Rav Huna, who said that nifsal is just can't be, Persians took over and said the Roman coin's no longer in use here. That's already, you can just return it. L'didach damar nifsal psalto malchut, harei peiro b'rekivu yain v'chametz, tchip psalto medina adamu, v'katani m'shalem k'shad gzela. That's a change. That's a serious change. The fact that now it can't be used should mean that you acquire it, which means if you acquire it, you should have to return it at its original value. You shouldn't be able to give it back to them. So says, well, this might be a change and a serious change, but it's not a change in the coin itself. It's a change in the use of the coin, but the coin physically, it's not a physical change. The others are physical change. The wine turned to vinegar. That's a change in, now it's true, it's not physical. It still looks the same, but it has this different taste, has a different smell. That's not the same as this kind of change where it's just a change in terms of what the authorities have declared it. But the physical item is exactly the same. And that's why he puts it in the second category. Amarle Rava le Rav Yehuda. L'didak damar. Now we're going to question the second one. Salto malchut nami hainu nistak. If you think psalto malchut is really the same as nistak, truma v'nitmet psalto medina dami malchut dami v'katani omer lo haresh chalafanecha. Again, the way we understood the currency is no longer in use should be much more like it's not noticeable damage, and therefore it should be more in the second category of the truma, and it's disqualified. So how do you put it in the first category? Amarle hatam lo minkar hezeka hacham minkar hezeka. What do we call it? Hezek she'eno nikar. Nezek that's not noticeable. Now, if the Roman coin is no longer usable in our country, that's noticeable damages, because even though, now, again, the first opinion was, well, nothing physical happened to the coin, but it's known damage. Everybody knows that we can't use this coin anymore. So that's known, might not be able to be physically noticed in the coin in terms of any change in the coin. But the fact that everyone knows that you can't use it is a known thing. Not everyone's going to know that the truma became impure unless you happen to see, because the truma looks exactly the same. That's not a noticeable thing. And that's why the second opinion, Rav Yehuda can distinguish in that way between those cases. Itma. Now we have a machloket between Rav and Shmuel, which again, we're going to say is not really a machloket. Oh, sorry. I disagree. This one is a machloket. I just got confused with the previous one. Previous one we said is not a machloket. This is going to be a machloket. You loan someone money on a coin. What does that mean? It means that whatever you loan me, it doesn't matter, but you said, pay me in 10 slaim, let's say, okay? Pay me in 10 sela coins. That was the deal. So whatever I borrowed, let's say I borrowed wheat, and then you said, when you return the loan, I don't want wheat, I want money. What money? We said an amount, 10, right, gold, whatever, silver sela coins, whatever. We said 10 sela coins. Now, then nifsela hamatbea. Now the sela goes out of use. You might remember this happened in Israel where there was the old shekel and the new shekel, right? And the old shekel went out of use. So if we said on shekels, and now the shekel changed, right? And that shekel is no longer in use, what, right? Well, we'll see. Maybe that's not the best example yet. We'll get to a different, that's going to come up later. But let's just say shekalim are no longer in use. The Romans took over and they said you can't use shekels anymore. Rabbi Meir, turning now to Amabet, notein lo matbea hayotze bo tasha. Well, you use now, instead of the shekel, there's now a lira or whatever it is. You use that, okay? That's the one you use, 10 of the other. That's why I did use this example of sela and sela. Like, let's just assume there was the old the shekel, the new shekel. Use it in the currency of the new shekel. And the same value, whatever, you have to figure out the value. Whatever 10 slaim is valued at, now in the new currency, whether it's the same, it's called the same name, it's called a different name, it doesn't really matter. But you take that amount, you do, right? You go open your app on your phone, the currency app, and you just flip the currency and you figure out, okay, this is what I owe. Shmuel Amar, this is a great sugya for, economists. It's a very interesting sugya, especially if we make it to the very end of the daf. I'm not sure if we will, otherwise we'll see it tomorrow. Super interesting stuff. Shmuel Amar, Yachol Amar lo, lechotzio b'meshan. Shmuel says, what do you mean? You can give him the old currency because the Persians took over. But the Romans are in rule in Meshan. You can go bring it to Meshan and use it there. So you can give back and as you set a set amount, give back the set amount. And okay, the person will use it in Meshan. So now Rav Nachman's going to explain Shmuel, modify it a little bit and say, by the way, this is only if, okay, and then we're going to ask 2 questions on this. I'm Rav Nachman, Mistabri Milton to Shmuel, Dile Orcha Lamez al Meshan. Avalele Orcha Lo. You can't just I can't just return you the money if it can be used in Meshan unless you have plans to go to Meshan, okay? You never plan to go there. Okay, there's different ways to read this line. It could be either there's a path to get to Meshan, okay, it's easy to get there, or it could be you're planning to go there. That seems to be more the interpretation. If you have no plans to get there, I can't return you that money. It's really not fair. So now, Eitive Rava Rav Nachman. So Rava has a problem with Rav Nachman's explanation. Shmuel, the first question is going to be clear on Rav Nachman. The second question, unclear whether we're going back to Shmuel himself or Rav Nachman's explanation of Shmuel. Okay, it's not so critical either which way. But Rava says to Rav Nachman, Ein Mechalani, now we're going to talk about Maser Sheni. Remember Maser Sheni, you have fruits, you're supposed to bring them to Jerusalem, but you can redeem them on a coin and bring the coin to Jerusalem and use it there. Ein Mechalani, what coins can you use? Al ma'ot she'enan yotzot. You can't use coins that are not in circulation. Ketzad, what does this mean? Well, hayula ma'ot kozviot, or Yerushalmiot, o she'malachim arishonim ein mechalalim. You have kozviot, that's from the time of Bar Koziba, which was in the time of Bar Kochva, or Yerushalmiot, or of the early kings, which are either no longer in currency, or if you read Flashback this week, super interesting article by Shuli Mishkin about these coins. Some of them, kozbiot, by the way, some people don't say it's, some people say it's from Kziv. Some people think it's kozbiot, Yerushalmiot. Those two go together, it's one category. If you say it's Kziv, Kziv is in the north. Obviously, it's not the same as the Yerushalmiot. According to what Shuli claims from there's evidence to be saying this, these are made up coins, that the Jews made up coins to try to show we're in charge. And we'll get back to this a little bit later in today's daf at the end, that they made these coins because they wanted to have their own coins, but they were never really used because there was no Jewish rule at the time. So they couldn't really use their own coins. So anyway, you can read our article. It's more clear than what I'm saying, but this very, very interesting issue here. So if you had these ma'ot, which aren't used at all, then mechalalim, you can't use them. But this seems to imply hashal achronim dumia derishonim mechalalim. But this seems to imply if you have coins that are similar to those, but not like those, meaning they're not rishonim, they're achronim, meaning they're later, they were in use, but they're no longer in use here, but could be in use somewhere else. So it sounds like you could use them. And what did Rav Nachman say? Only if you're planning to go, right? So now, okay, so now we say the following. When Shmuel said, you can only do it, and Rav Nachman explained, only if you plan to go to Meshan, that's a case where the Malchuyot don't allow the use of these coins to be taken from place to place. And then the braita, which says you can use these other coins, is when the nations you're allowed to bring coins from one place to another and use other coins. The idea here is that there must have been times where the ruling country didn't let any other coins. You can't use any other currency, only their currency. If you can only use their currency, then you can't do Maser Sheni on any coins, but you can do Maser Sheni on these coins that are not necessarily so much in use because there's someone in use, and when you get to Jerusalem, someone will be able to use those coins. That's because it's a place where the countries are not, they allow use of different coins. So therefore, you can use a coin that maybe isn't majorly in use, but sometimes could be in use. Whereas Rav Nachman basically said, only if you're going to that place, but if you're not going to that place, you can't give people that coin because you'll never be able to use it anywhere because the countries don't allow you to cross the border with those coins, or they don't allow you within their city to use some other coin. So now they say, wait a minute, something really doesn't make sense here. Elaki Amar Shmuel, if you're going to say that Shmuel was talking about Shamochiyot Makpidot also, then how do you think you're going to get to Meshan with that money? In other words, if I'm giving you money and you're planning to go to Meshan, and you can bring that money to Meshan and use it there, but we just said the Medinot or Makpidot, how on earth are you going to get your money to Meshan? This is a really great answer the Gemara comes up with. So, how on earth are you going to get it to there? To which they say, well, the way it works, you'd have to say, is that they don't allow it to cross the border, but people smuggle it in all the time, okay? And so basically, I can return you money with the intent that if you are planning to go to Meshan anyway, you can smuggle the money in. Because the case is, now, even though they're makpidot, but they don't check everybody's bags, okay? They don't do thorough checks. Only if they happen to see you using it, they'll make an issue. But you could probably smuggle across the border, and so here we're allowing me to return you money in a way that you have to do something illegal to actually use that money. It's a little bit crazy. But we resolved the question against Rav Nachman. Second question, Tashma. And like I said, some of the commentaries say this is on Rav Nachman's explanation of Shmuel. Some people say it's just on Shmuel in general. We're now going to have all sorts of situations where you're living in one place and you want to use coins from a different place or coins from your place. We're going to see. So you can't, and it's again Maser Sheni money. You can't put your fruits onto Maser Sheni money if it's money of Israel and you're in Babylonia, meaning you can't use the Israeli coin in Babylonia. If you have some shekels on you, let's say, you can't use that. V'shel Bavel v'hem kan, or you can't use Babylonian coins to do your Maser Sheni money if you live in Israel. Shel Bavel v'hem b'Bavel machalalim, but if you're in Babylonia, you can take your Babylonian money and use that. That's what you have to use. Okay, so the first thing, we're going to have a bunch of issues with this whole source. But the first question is, Katani miyat e machalalin ma'ot shel kan v'hem b'Bavel. But remember, you're on your way to Israel. That's why it sounds more like Rav Nachman. You're on your way to Israel and you're bringing it to Israel. What did Rav Nachman say? As long as you're going to Meshan, right? Shmuel says you can give the money that's going to be used there. So why shouldn't you be allowed to use Maser Sheni money if you're living in Babylonia and you use shekels? Because you're anyway going to Israel. Makes perfect sense that you should be able to. Why not? Why can't you do it? To which they say, again, well, the problem is that they don't allow you to cross the border with it. That's why you can't use your Maser Sheni money. Can't do on Israeli shekels because you'll never get it across the border. They'll block you probably before leaving Babylonia. Maybe they won't let you out of the country with that money on you. So ihati, well, then we have a bigger problem. Then what are you supposed to do? You want to bring Maser Sheni from Babylonia. What do? Shel Bavel v'hem b'Bavel. That's what you're supposed to do. Use Babylonian coins. Well, lamai chazu. If you can't bring the Babylonian money into Israel, because the authorities there will stop you, how are you supposed to use your coins that the whole goal is, instead of carrying your fruits, carry the money, use the money in Jerusalem? So, chazu dizaben lehu behema umasik liyushalayim. No, you redeem it onto a coin, a Babylonian coin, and in Babylonia, you buy an animal and bring the animal across the border. That you could do. First of all, that is a big problem because not everyone thinks that you could buy animals with Maser Sheni money. So that's a separate problem. The commentaries say you'd have to assume that this holds by a different opinion, and there is an opinion quoted that you can, and this would only fit according to that commentary. Okay, but another problem. What did we say? We just said that that Shel Bavel, and you're in Israel, you can't use. Why? Because this is a problem with that one. If you're in Babylon, you can't use Babylonian coins if you're in Israel. Why not? Because the Medinot are makpidot, right? But then it says that they made a takana at some point that you could bring any currency into the Jerusalem because, right, it's like Jerusalem is the melting pot. There's a million people that come from different places and everybody uses their own coins, and therefore you can always have what to buy with and you can always use all the currencies. So they made a takana because of this, because everyone's using different currencies. So on the other hand, we just said, Medinot Makpidot. So Amar B'Zera Lo Kashya. It really depends on what point in history you're talking about. Kam Bizman Shiad Yisrael Tkefal Umod Olam. Kam Bizman Shiad Umod Olam Tkefal Atzman. Okay, there's different times where the Jews are in power or the Jews are not in power. When the Jews had a lot of strength, that's when they made this takana that everyone could use any coins they wanted. But the braita was talking about a situation where the Gentile regime was very strict. So you couldn't take Babylonian money if you're in Israel because you have nothing, you can't use it. They won't let you use it in Jerusalem because the Gentiles are in charge there and not letting you do it. Okay, so what we did there was we had this machloket between Rav and Shmuel. Now Rav Nachman kind of modified Shmuel. You can only return those coins that are in use somewhere else if they were anyway planning to go there. Right? Rava thinks you can't return coins at all that are not in use here, okay, ever. But Shmuel said you could as long as they can use them somewhere else. And Rav Nachman said only if you're actually going to that place. And then we had this whole thing about, are they makpid, are they not makpid? How can you use this currency? How can you get it? And we even said you might have to smuggle it across the border, but you still could give that money. Okay. Now we're going to do another braita, and this relates to the whole thing. And this is really where Shuli's article is about. Tanu Rabbanit, if we talked about this Yerushalmi, what kind of matbeot are we talking about? Ezu matbeah shel Yerushalayim, David u'Shlomo b'tzad echad, v'Yerushalayim ir kodesh mitzad acher. Okay, they look like this. David and Shlomo were on one side, and David and Solomon, and Jerusalem was on the other side. She basically writes in her article that they never found such coins like this, okay? Even though we found lots of coins from that time, and that's why she calls her article Fantasia. This is all kind of fantasy money, what the Jews dreamed of having. Okay, then Ezu matbeah shel Avram Avinu, that was apparently another coin that was known. Zaken uzkena mitzad chad u'bachor b'tula mitzad acher, right? Showing the different generations. Very beautiful image. Avram and Sarah on one side and Yitzchak and Rivka, like the young ones, on the other side. Okay, we're going to leave our next question, which is a really interesting economic question, for tomorrow. We'll do a quick summary of our daf. We started with this issue of Rabbi Meir and Chachamim having flipped positions. We brought up right to the supported Rav's ruling and Rav's reading of this. So yeah. Then we brought this issue about the slave, right? Does Rav really hold it? Avadim are like karka, because look at this case with the slave where he actually doesn't have to pay the rental of the slave. And we got into zen and avazel chaser, like the squatter case, and compared the cases. Then we had the case where Rav Yosef was doing something his son convinced him it was wrong, not really because of the zen and avazel chaser, but more because of the issue of the rebate, okay, of the interest. Or specifically, the first part was okay because it was zen and nevazel chaser, but the issue of the rebate was more of a problem. Then we had the boat. What do you do with the boat? Is it the rental or is it the depreciation? Then we defined what is the difference between the two matbeot and the Mishna, that one is this halacha, one is that. We had two different approaches about the nifsal. From there, we got into this machloket Rav and Shmuel about if your currency is no longer in use and you agreed in the loan to a particular currency, do you pay its value in the new currency? Or according to Shmuel, you could give the old things because they can use it somewhere else. And then Rav Nachman said, only if they're actually planning to go to that other place. With that, we raised two questions against Rav Nachman and his explanation. And then with that, we quoted this braita that we had a bunch of questions about that we had to resolve. Okay, and then we just went into, since we mentioned in one of those braitot, these ma'od of Yerushalayim, what were they? And we talked about, Shuli calls it this fantasy money. Anyway, you should read Shuli's article. And also later today, Alana's second shiur in the slew of Cheresh Shoten Katan, about the Cheresh, is going to be up on the site later today. Fascinating shiur about how deaf people are viewed in halacha and how this has changed over time. So recommended. This three-part series of hers of Cheresh Shoten Katan is a must listen for anybody who learns Gemara. So very highly recommended in Din and Daf. Wishing everybody a good day and Besarot Tovot.